Welcome back to the channel. Let's take a look at the Samsung Galaxy Camera 2 and try to answer the question, should you still buy this thing as of right now, and is this thing worth your hard-earned money? Now, if you're unfamiliar with the Galaxy Camera 2 from Samsung, it's pretty much an Android camera from Samsung, and you can pretty much do anything you can do on a traditional smartphone or tablet with the Galaxy Camera 2, because this thing does run, of course, Android. And when it comes to the tech specifications of this thing, first and foremost, let's take a look at the screen. So it has a 4.8-inch screen with a resolution of 720 by 1280, so roughly a 720p screen. And for the camera, we're talking about a 16 megapixel shooter, and for the video capability, it does shoot 1080p videos at 30 frames per second. And then when it comes to the tech specs, because of course this is pretty much just an Android smartphone or an Android tablet with a camera attached, we're talking about a quad-core chipset at 1.4 gigahertz with a whopping 2 gig of RAM. And then of course it does have a 2000 milliamp hour battery for this thing. And when it comes to the screen on this thing, it's pretty much just your standard LCD as far as I'm aware. I don't think Samsung actually went the extra step to put something like Super OLED or Super AMOLED on this thing, however you want to call it. And for the operating system, of course, it is running Android, and it's running an old build. It's actually running 4.3 or 4.4 Jelly Bean, and honestly, yes, that is an old operating system, but that is still pretty modern, at least if you compare it to some of the other ones in the past. And I think this is a pretty good software that they ended up leaving this thing on, Jelly Bean, and I'm okay with this. Now let's go ahead and take a little bit closer look at this thing. So you can see this is pretty much just a standard camera, like a standard point and shoot, but it's far from a standard point and shoot, because of course, again, this does run the Android operating system. You can go ahead and see the focal length of the actual camera lens right there. You can see on the top right of the camera, it does actually point to a 21x lens right there, so that's pretty cool. You do have a pretty long lens when it comes to zooming capabilities, which is actually pretty cool. And then right here you do have a sensor right there, which is a light sensor. And then flipping it on the top of this camera, you can see there are a couple of different things. First and foremost, you have, of course, your shutter button. You do have a zoom scroll right there, so you can zoom in and out. You do have a button here to bring up the flash, because this thing does have a flash. It's not automatic, and you will have to press that every time, but it is convenient. It does have a flash. And then of course you have your power button right there and your lock switch right there. And then moving to the back, you do have a pretty big screen. You have a 4.8-inch screen. Now when it comes to today's standards, like specifically smartphones of today, this really doesn't compare, and it is a pretty small screen. But the thing is, you do have to remember with a device like this, most cameras anyway, don't really have a big viewfinder. So if you were to take pictures with this thing, you do have a pretty big screen, to be honest, at your disposal when you're taking videos and photos and things like that. So it is pretty nice. It does have a 4.8-inch screen, but that makes sense, again, since you are also using this as like a standard Android smartphone or tablet and things like that. They had to put a fairly big screen on this thing. And then moving to the bottom of this camera, we do have a standard tripod mount right there, so you can use things like tripods with this camera. And then of course we do have the battery door right here. Let me go ahead and open this thing up so you can see what we're talking about. Now the nice thing with this camera in particular is the fact that, one, it does have a removable battery. Let me go ahead and remove the battery here so you can see what type of removable battery it has. So you can pretty much change this. You can see it's running a Samsung BP2000, and yes, this is a 2000 milliamp battery, which is pretty big, especially for the time this thing came out. It was a fairly big battery. Now of course 2000 milliamps is really nothing at all, and that's pretty tiny. And then you do have a mini or micro HDMI port right there if you wanted to connect this to your TV to get playback of the camera. And then of course it does actually have a removable storage right there. Now I forgot to mention that this does have 8 gig of internal memory on this thing, which it is upgradable. And of course, if you're going to be taking a lot of video or taking a lot of photos and storing apps and things like that, you're definitely going to need to buy a memory card with this thing. But of course, this can use a memory card. One thing I will have to notice, even though this is called the Samsung Galaxy Camera 2, it is technically kind of a step back from the original Samsung Galaxy camera. The biggest thing that they did leave out of this camera is the fact that the first iteration of this product actually had a SIM card slot, so you could technically take out your SIM card from your smartphone and things like that, pop it in the Samsung Galaxy Camera 1 and actually walk around, take photos, take video, and then upload them to social media or your email or whatever the case may be. But that's missing from this one specifically, and that's kind of a bummer. So it's kind of like a step down in some ways when it comes to the actual camera itself. And then the last thing to note about this camera is the fact that this camera in particular actually also does have NFC technology. And of course that is nice, especially if you are pairing this to things like, for instance, a Android device. You can easily pair this with NFC technology, which is nice to like transfer photos or videos. And this thing also had a dedicated app. Granted, I'm not too sure if the dedicated app actually works with this thing. You can see there is a speaker grill on one of the sides because of course this is an Android phone essentially, so you may want to listen to music or listen to the video that you do record on this thing. And then on the other side you do have charging port because this does charge through micro USB. Nothing too crazy, but at least it is a standard port, micro USB. A little bit older, but it is nice it's there. And then the interesting thing about this device is, yes, even though it is a camera, technically it does actually have a 3.5 millimeter headphone jack if you wanted to use that jack itself. Now let's actually go ahead and turn this thing on and see what we're talking about. Now when you turn this on, actually it's always going to go to the camera application. Let me go ahead and turn this camera on. You can see it says Samsung Galaxy Camera EKGC200 because that's the model number of this thing. But let me go ahead and turn this on. Like I was saying before, this does actually boot up to the camera before it boots up to anything else. Now when it actually comes to the experience of this thing, I will have to say that it holds up extremely well, even for it being an outdated version of Android. I actually really don't have any problems with this device. You can still browse the internet just fine and do everything you do on a normal Android device or a smartphone of today. But I will have to admit it isn't going to be the fastest thing in the world because it is a little bit older and things like that, and you won't get all the modern day features of a modern day Android operating system. But just the fact that it's pretty good for what it is pretty nice. Now here's the camera app I was talking about, and since this is specifically trying to be a camera first rather than an Android device first, you do have a lot of options when it actually comes to the camera control, and that's something I actually really do like about this device. Let me go ahead and go into mode, and you can see there is a whole bunch of different modes. You got auto. If you don't know what you're doing, it'll try to adjust the camera to your situation. You have a smart mode, which has different modes for the camera. You can set it in depending on what you're trying to capture, like for instance landscape, kid shot, color bracket, best face, continuous shot, selfie, beauty mode, etc. And then I think there is also an auto mode, I'm pretty sure, with this camera, or a manual mode, excuse me. So I'm pretty sure you can set everything. Let me go ahead and see if I can bring that up really quickly. I don't know where it is. Oh yeah, it's called the expert mode. And then once you put this thing into the expert mode, which if I go back here again, you go to modes, and then you go to expert, and once you click on expert, you can pretty much adjust everything like a traditional camera if you are used to a traditional camera, like your depth of field, your ISO, and things like that. So that's kind of cool. They do have this on that camera, so they do give you a lot of features when it actually comes to the camera itself, and I'm actually pretty impressed, to be honest. Now let me go ahead and go to the Android operating system. All you have to do is when it boots up into the camera, you just press the You just touch the home, and then once you touch the home icon, of course, it will actually bring you to the Android operating system. And you can see this is TouchWiz of old. It's very old at this point, of course. This is Android, I think, 4.4. Let me go into the settings to actually verify that. I know it is a build of Jelly Bean. Let me see what Jelly Bean it is actually on. Yep, it is on Android 4.3, so here it is. Android 4.3 Jelly Bean is on the screen, and this is the last official update you can get from this. I'm sure there are some custom ROMs floating around the internet for this device if you wanted to actually update this for yourself and actually make it a much more modern device than Android Jelly Bean, but it is kind of cool. It is running on Android Jelly Bean, and Android Jelly Bean is still acceptable today, at least in my opinion. I wouldn't say it's my first choice for a device, but I definitely wouldn't say it's my last choice for a device, just because Android Jelly Bean brought a whole bunch of things that I'm actually happy with. Now let's actually go ahead and go to something like the web browser so you can see some performance of this thing. And this thing is pretty much stock at this moment. There's nothing really anything too new on this device. I pretty much have this factory reset, to be honest, because for the most part I really don't do anything on here where I need apps or anything like that, but everything does work, like the Play Store. The Play Store won't work now because I'm not signed into my Google account, so I can't access that, but I can take you to the web browser and actually go ahead and go to a website and show you how this actually works as a traditional like tablet or smartphone. Let me go to something like CNN.com. And surprisingly, it actually loads fairly fast. Again, it's not going to be the fastest thing in the world, and you can see for some reason it is chugging on CNN.com, so you can see it does take a hot minute, especially right now since I am pretty much by my router. I will have to say this doesn't support anything crazy like AC or Wi-Fi 6. It only supports the old N standard, and you can see it is a kind of a slow device for what it is. But when it comes to scrolling and things, I don't think it's too bad of an option, especially if you need something to actually use. Keep in mind, in this video, the performance may not be the same as you using it on your own because there is an installed screen protector, and I think for some weird reason the installed screen protector on this is kind of for some reason interfering with the actual camera itself, so take that for what it is. But usually I've had no problems with performance here. Let me go ahead and try another website, but keep in mind also this thing only has 2 gig of RAM, and with a lot of things 2 gig of RAM nowadays is just not the greatest experience in the world. And for some reason I just wanted to show you the camera locked up in the web browser, and for some reason I can't bring up anything at the very moment. So take that for what it is. There may be a little bit of glitches and hiccups with this thing. Again, it only has 2 gig of RAM with a quad-core processor at 1.4 gig. This thing is a little bit older and things like that, so take it what it is. But for the most part, when I've used it, I've had no problems. You can browse the internet. You can also use things like YouTube on here. Let me go ahead and see if I can bring up a YouTube video. It may try to make me install a brand new version of YouTube on here. Let's go to the web browser and try to bring up YouTube and see if YouTube will actually play. But like I said, since this is running Android, you can pretty much do everything a traditional Android device can actually do. But yeah, I don't know why when I'm recording this right now I'm having problems with the actual device, because before, even though this thing is really outdated, it really wasn't having any problems. I don't know what the case is and why this thing is stuttering and not loading web pages like it should, but I'm telling you before it did. So just take this video as caution if you are trying to buy this. But let's actually really answer the question, should you actually buy this device, and is this device actually worth it? Well, I'm gonna be honest with you guys, this thing on the market is still going for quite a penny. I've seen this anywhere from like $120 to maybe $200, and in some cases, depending on if this is still brand new in the box, I've seen it going for as high as like $300, believe it or not. And honestly, right now, I will have to say that I don't recommend this to practically anybody out there, and I'm going to tell you why I don't recommend this to anybody out here. First and foremost, of course, you would technically be buying this just for the camera itself, because that's the main selling point of this device. It is a camera first. And even when this thing came out on the market as the Samsung Galaxy Camera 2, it really wasn't a device where you were thinking, yes, I need to really pick this up, because basically the camera on here is pretty much a standard smartphone sensor and smartphone lens of the time. So just think of whenever this thing came out, it was pretty much the same type of pictures you would get on a smartphone back then when this came out. And honestly, that is really not great, especially since this was kind of expensive at release. I think this was somewhere around $400 and some at release, and for most people this honestly really didn't make sense. Of course, the one advantage this thing has going for it is the fact that it does have an optical lens, where, as you guys know, with modern day smartphones, none of them really have an optical lens, and you would be getting an advantage there because it does have a very long zoom length of 21x. You can see the specs on here. It says Samsung zoom lens 4.1, 86.1 millimeter to something millimeter. But anyway, yes, that is the advantage here. But besides that, you're not really getting anything too crazy. And I can tell you one thing I don't like about this camera. The pictures are actually still pretty good, but again, they are mimicking an older Android smartphone of the past, and most people really do have modern day smartphones at the very moment. So if you have a modern day smartphone from like the last 2, 3, even 4 years, you're going to be way better off than buying this, and your smartphone will definitely beat this 100%. And then another thing I don't like about this product is the fact that for some reason, when I got this, I pretty much got this, I think, brand new at like a crazy sale or something like this. And the real problem with this device is the fact that for some reason the video shooting in this thing is just absolutely garbage. I don't know if I have a defective one or what, but the real problem is it takes a lot of light before the image on this thing can be very clear. But again, this could be a defective model or what, but every time I shoot video on this thing, it's very dim and it's very hard to see, and you pretty much need to be in direct sunlight before you can even get very bright video. The video is always a little bit too dim, at least in my testing. And then besides the camera pretty much being mediocre and being just like a smartphone of the past, which that's why I don't recommend this. Again, your smartphone of today will definitely beat this. Another thing I don't like about this, if you're trying to use this as like a regular tablet or just a regular smartphone as device and just skip the camera itself, the big issue is when you first turn this on, it's always going to go to the camera application most of the time, and even if it doesn't, it'll boot up like this. But the real problem is it is kind of awkward to hold. Do you really want a device that does have a big camera lens on it as you're doing things like browsing the internet and using this device? Sure, I still do think that this thing does hold up with 4.3 Jelly Bean, and you can still do anything you can do on a modern day smartphone, but just the fact that it is going to be awkward to hold, whether you hold it in portrait mode or whether you hold it in landscape mode, I really do think this is going to be a device that's going to be not too comfortable to use, especially if you want to put this in your pocket and you travel with it. You will have that camera hump again, and that's something I'm really not a big fan of. So the two things that kill this camera off immediately is the fact that, one, again, the camera on this thing is mediocre, and if you have a modern day smartphone, it'll beat the pants off this thing. Even though this is a standalone camera, unfortunately they pretty much just mimic a regular Android camera of the past. And then two, this isn't really a good standalone tablet-esque smartphone-esque device because it is kind of awkward to hold. And then of course, again, this is running an old version of Android, and even though in my testing, besides the video you're watching, I did notice that some applications just don't run at all anymore, and there may be some situations you may need to actually use some applications. But when you go to the Google Play Store, it says please update the Android operating system, or it'll say this app is not supported on this Android version, and that is a big thing with this. I guess the one nice thing with this camera still is the fact that it takes decent photos, and it does have a pretty big camera lens on there for zooming capability, and you do have the nice satisfaction, I guess, of actually having a camera that does have Android. So if you want to do like video edits or upload things to the net, it would be kind of practical and kind of easy, and that's pretty much why Samsung made this to begin with. They really wanted to make a device where you can take pictures on the go and upload them to the internet. The only downside was it was expensive to begin with, and the photos on here weren't anything too amazing. It was pretty much like carrying a modern day smartphone of the past with this thing, so it was kind of like, why even buy this to begin with? But I do respect Samsung for trying something new, and believe it or not, this is not even the first attempt at an Android camera. There has been other companies. I know a couple companies actually made mirrorless or DSLR Android cameras, and then I do know, for instance, Nikon of all companies actually made another point and shoot Android camera, but it was actually worse than Samsung's attempt because it was running a much more older version of Android, so it was a little bit more slower and a little bit more laggier, and the sensor wasn't as good. So I would take this over a couple of different options out there on the market if you can still find an Android camera. Cool attempt, but it doesn't really make sense, and you can see why Samsung for the most part doesn't support this, and probably honestly will never make something like this ever again because sales were bad. And if you have a modern day smartphone, it's kind of like, why even buy this to begin with? So it was kind of like, yeah, it doesn't make sense. Anyway, guys, this is Wayne from My Tech News signing out.